can see in skeletons whether people suffered from famine, for example, and there's much more famine after agriculture than before agriculture. Our birth rate went up dramatically. Women were having far more babies, which is not good for them, health-wise. And the biggest killers of humanity, the most devastating contagious diseases, all entered the picture after agriculture. All the influenza, the smallpox, the chickenpox, the cholera, all these tuberculosis, all these things came from domesticated animals that humans were suddenly living very close to. And, and we were living in our own shit and in animal shit for centuries. Before agriculture, we were nomadic. So, we were moving like wolves, like you weren't living where you were shitting. You were leaving it behind and always moving along, part of the ecosystem. But then suddenly with agriculture, you had thousands of people living in one place and staying there. And, the streets were full of shit. And up until the 1800s, people were walking through shit all day, every day. It's crazy, very unhealthy. So, there's so many myths about civilization having been this great gift to humanity. But when you look at it, in terms of specifics, and you also sort of take away the bias of looking at it from the perspective from within civilization. If you just sort of step back and say, okay, let's measure this. Let's really take a look at this. So for example, there's the propaganda that says, I said earlier, Hobbes called human life solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, right? So we talked about solitary. That's obviously untrue. Poor. Well, what do we mean by poor? What is poor, right? Is poor having less than someone else? That's what poverty is in our world, right? It's a relative thing. But what does poor mean? If everyone has the same amount, what does poor mean? Having enough to eat, having good quality food, having plenty of free time, having plenty of clean water, having shelter from the elements, a relative comfort. If you have those things, can you be considered poor, right? Hunter-gatherers had all of those things. They had health, they had lots of free time. Most hunter-gatherers work about 12 hours a week. 12, that's less than your friends in Portugal, right? 12 hours a week. And what is that work? It's things that we consider relaxation, hunting, fishing, gathering fruit and hanging out, talking with friends while you're chipping arrowheads or whatever. These are very relaxed lives that hunter-gatherers live. This idea that life was a constant struggle for survival, that's the opposite of true. Life was relaxed and easy. It became a struggle for survival after agriculture. So solitary, poor, nasty, violence. How much violence was there before agriculture? Very little. These people like Steven Pinker that claim that there were these constant wars and man was a wolf to man. This is all bullshit. There's no evidence for this anywhere. The evidence for massive massacres and slaughters and violence and extreme violence, that's all after agriculture, if you're looking at skeletal remains and things like that. And the other thing that they do, which is very funny, Steven Pinker does this all the time, is he'll look at a hunter-gatherer society and say, like I remember one example he uses is the San people of Botswana, the Kalahari Desert. And he says that they have a murder rate higher than most American cities today, right? Which is, 3 of 100,000 people are murdered or something like that, right? But the difference is that there are only like 400 San people. So to have a murder rate of, 3 in 100,000, that sort of, you do the numbers, that turns out like there was one murder in the last 100 years, right? Whereas in Baltimore, there are 50 murders a day or whatever it is, or Chicago, right? It's like these crazy. But because there are so few people, if there's one murderer in 100 years, one guy killed another guy because he caught him fucking his wife, suddenly their murder rate is higher than in, America. Although nobody is ever worried about getting murdered among the Sun, right? So it's this crazy, weird statistical way of playing with numbers.
Well, it's so much a life expectancy.
What's that?
The life expectancy issue?
Oh, it's that thing. Yeah, short, right. Solitary, nasty, poor, brutish, and short. Life expectancy, the idea that we've doubled the human lifespan. That's absolute nonsense. Human hunter-gatherers live into their 70s regularly. As a species, Homo sapiens typically lives into our 70s. So, you read in Sex at Dawn, we talked about that, and I talk about it again in this book, the way that this propaganda is being used to say that, we're so lucky to live where we do now. It's like the zookeeper telling the animals, oh, you're so lucky to be here in this cage because out there, oh my God, in the jungle, your ancestors had it really rough, Yeah, how come no animals are wandering in from the jungle saying, please let me live in the zoo? You never hear about that, right? You never hear about hunter-gatherers coming in and saying, oh, hey, can we come and live with you folks? No, they're always hiding. They're always running away. They're always trying to, preserve their way of life. They don't want to join us.
Wasn't there stories about Indian? I'm hearing an echo, but wasn't there stories about Indians and or when the Pilgrims came here, people going off and living with the Indians and I hate using the word Indians, but natives, and people were going off and wanted to live with them because they liked the way they were living and their lifestyle, and people were like, what the fuck? Why do you want to live with these savages?
Yeah, there are a lot of stories about that. In fact, Benjamin Franklin writes about that in some of his work. There was a law in colonial America making it illegal to leave and go and live with the Indians because so many people were doing that. And in fact, and that includes people who had been kidnapped by them. So, if there was a battle and the Indians would, and by the way, I use the word Indians because most Native people prefer that. They call themselves Indians. So, it's this Native American thing is something that white people did. And then the Indians were like, you know what, we're fine with Indians, whatever. But anyway, it was very common that when, there was a fight and the men were killed, the women and children would be kidnapped and taken back to the tribe, which was the customary thing that the Indians did, and they would be integrated into the tribe. So the woman would, be married by another man and, be included. They weren't slaves kept separate from the Indians. They would be integrated into the tribe. So then, a year or two later, there'd be another battle, and the whites would rescue them and bring them back to live, back in the Christian world and all that. And as soon as they got a chance, they'd sneak off and go back to be with the Indians. So people historically who have seen both worlds almost universally choose that world. They reject this world, whether they're people who were raised in our world but got a taste of that world, or people that were raised in that world and got a taste of this world. I talked about the people who were with Darwin. They were from Tierra del Fuego, Fuegians. They were picked up when they were teenagers, brought to England, educated, met the Queen, and saw all the best things that England had to offer. And then they were on Darwin's ship on the Beagle going back to Tierra del Fuego, where they were going to supposedly convince the other Indians to come and join civilization. Instead, they just went back and lived with the Indians and dropped everything. They abandoned the huts that the British built for them, abandoned the gardens. We're like, no, fuck it. Why should we farm? There's this famous example of an anthropologist was talking to a hunter-gatherer in Africa, and he was trying to explain to him how he could farm and how great it would be. And the hunter-gatherer said, why should I farm when there are so many mongo nuts in the world? It's like, that's a good question, man. There's so many mongo nuts. Why should I farm? Give me a break.